Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here. My name is Peter Bulens, and together with Brewery of Ideas and the whole team, I have the honor to welcome you all for this first executive briefing webinar of our brand new Insights.io digital conference platform. As you probably saw when registering, Insights.io offers a new concept of attending conferences. First of all, by splitting conference teams up in a series of sub-teams around which we will be organizing executive briefing webinars, and we will do so on a weekly or even a daily basis. But secondly, these presentations will be recorded and put available afterwards to the registered Insights.io community on our platform. So this executive briefing webinar is organized in close collaboration, as you already saw, with the DPO Circle and with Professor George Ataya from Solvay Business School. And so it's for us a very, very big pleasure to give the floor now to George, who will do the introduction of Alexander Jaspar from the Belgian Data Protection Authority. George, please, it's up to you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, here we are. Thank you very much, Peter. It's a delight to be here today. It's a delight to be the first one to start test this platform that is wonderful. We have been also discussing it for your information for initiatives related to security, cybersecurity. We have been discussing with the Cybersecurity Coalition last week. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm mainly delighted also to be with Alexander Jaspar, the person who is starting our series of webinars. We are planning to do quite more than one every month. Alexandra has been accompanying us, if I may say, already from the first day in early 2017, where she encouraged us and lectured at our education. She assisted the DPO Circle in various events. She almost have spoken at the different conferences that we have been organizing. So today we will be talking about, I will be mentioning in few words, what is DPO Circle, because many of you, I see the names of participants who are involved with us with many years for many years now. I will mention to you what is DPO Circle today. We will give the floor to Alexandra. She will be speaking, followed by Q&A. And I will be mentioning a project that you may all be interested in joining, which is a survey on the body of knowledge. What are the domains of competences that are required for a DPO or a GDPR professional? So first of all, and in a few minutes, DPO Circle, a community for data protection officers and also for GDPR professionals. We group various participants. It is not only limited to data protection officers, although those have a specific domain, protected domain, where they only can access, but we are also identifying the opportunity of having different people involved in GDPR to enrich this platform and to exchange, to network, and to relate with each other in various domains. So we talk about process owners, about advisors, external, internal advisors, IT-related, security-related, privacy-related, project manager, implemented-related, and we talk also about other privacy stakeholders, about regulators, etc. You see on the right column those different roles that are defined within that platform. The platform I'm talking about is the new platform. So if you have been involved with the old platform, I don't know why we have that black square here. The old platform is giving place to the new platform. I invite you to connect to the dpocircle.be. We didn't start yet the wave of migrating our participants, and our members. So expect, if you are already a member, to get in the coming week that invitation. but you can already connect now and identify yourself to that community. That community is free of charge, as we are going to mention later on. The community has various activities. It has private and public circles where you have the specific domains for the DPOs, you have specific circle for privacy academics, you have specific circle for process owners, HR managers, marketing managers, etc. And this is an example on the news feed that you see when you are connected. In the middle, you have the topics of interest, where we have various topics that are domains where you could go and feed, insert some files, some information, some news, some articles, and on the small frame on the right, it shows you an example of the content. And on the rightmost part, you have academy and courses where you have access to various presentations. Well, for example, the videos that would be taken today will be published there. All the presentation of our conference in December is already published there. You will have also access to preview for the e-learning classes for information security, risk management, IT, and in 3 languages, the GDPR e-learning that you may benefit from, and mainly many of your colleagues could use it as a base to know more about the 15 basic knowledge fundamentals of GDPR. We also have launched recently the members survey. The member survey is to check what is important for our members, what is that we have to develop. We have launched that survey with a series of students who worked with us on that project, and they worked for a few months to develop that and collect the results. The results of the survey helped us very much remodel the platform as you see it today. We plan a series of webinars, as you see. I'm delighted to announce Peter Galen next week, in 2 weeks' time, to talk about ISO 27701. No, it's next week, I'm sorry. We have also organized in the past DPO circle talks. We are starting those again, but more in virtual. We are planning series of interviews. The first one will be run tomorrow, will be shot tomorrow, and it will be announced in the coming week. And I will be delighted at the end of this webinar today to present to you our wonderful research that started 3 years ago, where we have been developing piece by piece, body of knowledge after body of knowledge. We have collected and compared the different body of knowledge or different educations that are available in order to identify what is important, what competence is required for a GDPR and DPO professional. And we will be allowing you to get your word and get involved in defining what are those domains where you are confident, and what are those domains where you consider are important for your activity. To finish with my short presentation, DPO Circle community is available and running since 2017. It's a free membership. Our model is based on various professional organizations worldwide that function well, that does not expect you to pay money and in exchange of that receiving a lot of information. Here, it's a real community. What you bring is what you get, plus many, as you noticed, information made available by our volunteers. You are invited to become a volunteer yourself, and we built that platform in order to allow everybody to connect, share, benefit, learn, and bring to others what they can share. So it is a group of many motivated volunteers. So I invite you to be part of the GDPR DPO community. Join at the dpocircle.be. Now is the time that we ask Alexandra to come forward, and we are so delighted to have her already. When she was a DPO, active DPO of one of the major Belgian organizations, and today she is director of the Belgian Data Protection Authority. Alexandra is speaking today in relation to their opinion, the DPA opinion, in relation to the tracing applications. Alexandra, thank you very much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, George. I just pressed the button so that you are supposed to all see me and hear me. I just want to check whether it's okay. I see no reaction. Well, I guess it's working. Just I'm going to start, and perhaps if someone of the organization realize that it's not working, please let me know. Yes, I see it's good. Okay, then I'm going to start. Thank you, George and Peter, for the introduction. I'm going to indeed give you a few insights on our recent, not opinion, but opinions with the S, because you will see later on that we issued 7 opinions so far in relation to the Belgian initiative, contact tracing initiatives of the last weeks. First of all, I'm going to give you I'm going to tell you a few words, but I need to find a way to go to the next slide. Well, then I'm going to need some help. Okay, got it. So I'm going to tell you the reason why we issued those opinions. In fact, we at the Belgian Data Protection Authority, we have several competence, of course, and one of these is to issue opinion advices in relation to all draft bills or draft decrees, ordonnances, royal decrees, whatever, who are putting in place a processing of personal data. We also issue advice when we get a piece of a law which adapts an existing processing of personal data or extends it. So what we do, we have a look at the draft bill or decree, and we issue a written advice that we also publish on our website and that we send to the drafter of the advice of the bill, which is generally a parliamentary or a FOD, SPF in French, and we point out the possible issues that we see in the advice. How do we work? We are, on the one side, the Belgian DPA, so myself representing the DPA, together with 6 external members, which are people representing the civil society of Belgium. I don't know why it's going to come back. Our advices, I said they are published. Yes, they are published. They are completely freely available, and they are not mandatory. That's important because the drafters of the bill remain still free to decide not to follow our advice or part of our advices. For the rest, give you just a figure so that you realize the work it can be. We receive approximately between 150 and 300 requests for advice per year, just on draft bills or decrees. Now, what do we do, in fact? What is the first purpose of those advice? What do we check? And what is, according to us, an acceptable law or decree putting in place a processing of personal data? In most cases, and it's certainly here the case when looking at tracing systems, the draft bills which we review organize and permit a processing of personal data by state entities. So they rely on Article 6.6 little c or 6 little e of the GDPR, processing in the framework of a legal obligation or processing made in the framework of a public interest mission and so forth. So you know that I don't have to repeat. And if we read the GDPR, the Belgian Constitution, and the EU Convention on Rights and Freedom, we can extract a few principles that we check when reading those draft bills. And the first one is that any processing of personal data by the state should be defined and explained in a very specific, precise legal instrument. And it's linked, it should be foreseeable for citizens. So that means that the text that we review should be clear, not ambiguous. It should not be a catch-all provision, for instance, whereby we would say, well, one day, if needed, this part of the state could do that with possibly every kind of data because it might be useful. No, it must be very specific so that people may understand what the state could do with their own personal data. Second thing that we always check is that what we call the essential elements of the contemplated processing are defined and in the right piece of law, in a formal piece of law, which is a law or a décret or ordonnance in French. So not in a royal decree or in a ministerial decree, because we consider those elements as so essential that they should be defined in a law so that a parliamentary discussion can take place And we have insurance, we have guarantee that it was really the willingness of the Belgian, well, representative of the people to put in place that processing of personal data. And those elements, they're not so much, it's just the purpose of the processing. So why we want to permit this processing of personal data? What do we want to achieve by this? And if possible at this stage, and it's not always possible, it's not always easy, already the identity of the data controller. The other essential element, which I will explain now, normally can be defined in a royal decree, ministerial decree, and another piece of law which is not a bill, decret, or ordinance. Now, there is a big exception to this principle when the processing which is created by the draft bill implies an important interference into citizens' rights and freedom, then additional elements should be defined in the law. And to give you a few examples, it's, for instance, when we consider processing DNA or other type of sensitive data, or when the bill creates a new central database, which will be accessible by a multiple of state authorities. So it's kind of intrusive. When it's about coupling, so mixing different kind of data, extracting from different kind of sources, or when it's about control, giving the possibility to certain state entity to control you via the new draft bill, which is subject to our review. Then in those situations, we consider that the interference in your rights and freedoms is so high that the bill should define the elements which are the data subjects. Who are we talking about? Which kind of citizens? The categories of data which will be processed, the retention duration of such data, the identity of the controller if it has not yet been mentioned in, well, sorry, it's in under brackets, but I should remove the brackets. And if the processing is about sensitive data and or creating a new central database, then we consider that the identity of the state's bodies who will get an access to the database should also be mentioned in the draft bill. It cannot be postponed to later because citizens must be able to understand and define as from scratch which kind of state entities will have access to data in relation to that. So this is what we would like to have in a draft bill creating a new processing of personal data, such as those on contract tracing. And when we get the draft, which hopefully contains all these elements, we make some tests, and that's the purpose of our advices. We check first if it's the right kind of normative text. Do we have a royal decree or a bill? Is this okay, or should the draft royal decree, for instance, be transformed into a law with a parliamentary discussion? Are those essential elements which I just listed all defined in the text that we have to review? And for each of the elements we checked, for instance, for the purpose, so the finalité in French, d'où, are these sufficiently specific, explicit, and legitimate? Again, is that no vague definition of the purpose? The data subjects, well, the categories of data subjects. Again, is the definition sufficiently clear and specific, or do we say, well, all possible people in the world? Same for the categories of data. Sometimes we see wording such as the required data will be used for, or the necessary data, or data which could be useful. No, it has to be defined. Again, it should be possible when reading the text to understand why those data are necessary and which data are we talking about. Otherwise, it would be a breach to the data minimization principle and possibly of the proportionality principle as well. Same for the data retention duration. We should check first that it mentioned in the text. It should be specified in the text, and then we check whether it's appropriate. Is that not too long? You will see that in a contract tracing context, it's contemplated to keep the data for 30 years. And we do the same check with the data controller, because sometimes the drafter of the text do not exactly understand who is the data controller. And then we rectify and explain again how the data controller should be defined in the text. Depending on the case, we also make some other checks and remarks, such as, for instance, lack of transparency, the need to take additional safeguards, to proceed with a DPIA, to agree on a protocol. It depends. Sometimes we have to repeat that it's not allowed in a draft bill to just copy paste some provisions from the GDPR. And in some case, we also, that's kind of frequent, repeat that authentic sources should always be used when the state wants to use data such as your national registry number or things like this. But it's very specific on a case by case, so I will not further discuss this. Now, to enter into our topic for today, so contact tracing. First, you have to know, and I mentioned it earlier, that we did not issue one opinion with regard to contact tracing, but 7 so far. The list is on the screen. I will show you that. Good too. So 7 opinions in approximately 5-6 weeks, I would say. The 2 first on royal decrees, then these royal decrees were passed, they are in application today. Then we received draft bills, so law, wetten, the loi, dealing with the same thing. In fact, they were copy-paste of the 2 royal decrees that we first commented. And then we received amendments made by certain parliamentary on the draft bill on the creation of a database BCN-SANU. I will explain all this later on, of course. And we also received a text from the Dutch-speaking community on the contact tracing system in their area. Before I tell you exactly what's in those different texts, let me tell you that I heard this week during the weekend that we should also review another text review, which will be what we call an accord de coopération, so cooperation agreement between the federal state and the local entities, so région and communauté. Why? Because the Council of State recently issued 3 advice whereby they indicated that the contact tracing is in fact a mix of federal competences, so competence of the federal Belgian state and of competence of the regions, so that the final normative text dealing with contact tracing should be a cooperation agreement between all these entities. So not a bill, not a royal decree, but a cooperation agreement. So I checked my mailbox and it should come sooner or later. Perhaps just tell you that we also were requested to issue those advice in a very short time frame. The urgency was there because, of course, contact tracing had to start as soon as the government decided to progressively deconfine the Belgian population. The special powers law, as we call it, was not used to escape from our advice, I would say, in the sense that this law gives the permission to the government to enact some royal decrees, because we are facing a very specific and urgent situation, but matters who should be dealt with by a law, a bill, still have to follow the normal path, the normal track, Parliament, advice from the DPA, advice from the Council of State, and so forth. So that's the reason why we were involved in this. Again, as I mentioned, our advice are not binding, but in this case, I must say they had a quite important impact on the Parliament, in the sense that they were issued the day before they had a discussion in the Parliament, and quite a lot of people who were present in the room at the Parliament read our advice, made some comments extracted from our advice, and insisted to postpone the debate during the Parliament to a later stage, because they wanted to be really familiar with the content of our advice. And they asked to put the debate on hold. So I must say, in this case, we had quite a lot of impact. Also in the press, we had a very wide press coverage on these opinions and draft. just to give you an insight, you will see that we always talk about two types of things: the creation of a database with Cienzano to fight blah blah, and the use of tracing apps. So these are the two big topics, and I will explain the difference between those two systems, because that's fundamental, of course. First, what we call the ordinary tracing, so contact tracing via call centers. We also sometimes name it manual tracing. What is this? It's the situation where your doctor asks you to pass a test to check whether you are infected. You pass the test and it's positive. So you get a result from the lab or from your doctor saying, yes, Mrs. ABC, you are infected. The system foresees that this information, so Mrs. ABC is infected, will be uploaded in a central database by the doctor or the lab. And this database will be used by regional contact centers to contact first yourself. So you will be contacted via telephone first, and if you don't answer, you will get a home visit. But first by telephone, let's say you answer the telephone and you will be contacted by those people, those agents, and they will ask you, could you please provide me with the names and contact details of the people you have been in contact with over the last 3 weeks? Because you might have infected those people. Then you will have the choice to provide with these names and contact details or not. At least I hope you are still left the choice not to answer. And the same contact center will, the same day, contact those people again via telephone, and if not, by a home visit. First, to inform those people that they might have been infected by someone. They don't provide with your names and other details allowing to make the link with you. They just inform those people that they might have been infected. There is a few questions such as, do you have symptoms? How do you feel? And so forth. Have you had a test? And based on the answers that they get to those questions, they provide the contacts of the infected people with recommendations. And those recommendations are, for instance, watch out if you cough, or you should pass a test, or stay home, avoid contact with elderly, and so forth. That's contact tracing in the ordinary sense via the call centers. Now, besides this, you also have the tracing via applications. So apps and contact tracing applications, as we call them. And how does it work? Well, if you want to use the system, you just download an application on your mobile phone. And when you have been in contact with someone who is infected, you will get a message. How does it work? It's a Bluetooth system whereby your phone, if it has been in contact with the phone of someone infected for more than 10 minutes at a distance of less than 1.5 meters, it will generate a system of very complex keys so that your phone will get a message. You will again not know who is the infected people, when you've seen this person and how long, so that you normally not can re-identify this person and so forth. And on the other end of the system, what happens if I am infected? So I get a message from my doctor saying how well the test is positive, and I want to share that information with the people that I've been in contact with for 3 weeks. I receive a code that I can upload in my phone, and which will generate message to the people who also have the application and have been in contact with me for more than 10 minutes and with a distance of less than 1.5 meters. So there is no generation of personal data. Everything is Bluetooth based. The data are stored within the telephones, within the smartphones of the two users, and there is normally no central registration of Mrs. Y has been in contact with Mr. X that day at that place for that duration. So it's fully anonymized. Now, the main issues that we have identified when reading the draft royal decrees or bills in relation to the what we call the ordinary tracing, that now that you know exactly what it is, were quite a lot. So I will try to only comment on the big ones, the more important. First of all, and that was very important, the lack of clarity as to the purpose of the bill. It was very unclear what the purpose of the bill was. And in fact, we managed to understand, but it took quite a lot of time that the bill was not only about contract tracing, it was about contract tracing by call centers, but also about the creation of a very big and central database within company that you all know called Cienzano, so a state entity dealing with health matters. And the idea was that the central database could be used for research purposes, but that was not clear from the beginning. And also it was not clear who amongst the searchers could have access to this database, to which kind of data stored in the database, for how long, under which conditions, and so forth. The bill was postponing the definition of who will be able to access which data and what for. And there is a third purpose, which is tentatively defined in the law and which we are still unable to understand today. So lack of clarity, impossible to foresee and understand which use will be made of your data. That was a big problem. Then the bills did not clearly explain the contract tracing system. For instance, there was no answers to questions such as, well, the people who are infected, are they going to be contacted by phone, or do they have the right to refuse? Which message will they receive? Is it like you have to provide us with the names of your contacts, or could you please help us tracing the virus by providing us these data? If they refuse, are the consequences foreseen? We heard that home visits would be foreseen, but well, in which circumstances? Is the police going to come as well, or are the agents going to stand before your door for 24 hours and knock on the door until you open? Absolutely not clear. And for the contacts, so the people that would have provided the names of, again, who is this going to work? That is very important and absolutely not described in the text. And the main question, are these people going to get recommendations? So we advise you to monitor symptoms, or perhaps it would be nice that you get a test, or is it going to be like you have to pass a test and do not get out, you have to stay home for 2 weeks, we're going to monitor this? Again, no clarity, no details as to this. The third very important remark that we made is that for us, the creation of a central, so country-wide database was not required and hence not legal, because the contract tracing is a regional competence. So there are currently 3 or 4, it's not clear, regional contact centers, and they are in charge of calling ill people on the one side and their contacts on the other side. But they are not supposed to know that someone infected in Bruges, well, if they are located in Arlon, for instance, they are not supposed to know that someone is infected in Bruges. There is no reason for that, no justification. So we do not understand why we need to have that central database instead of 3 or 4 databases stored and maintained, managed by local authorities. Another problem that we spotted is the fact that some of the data which supposedly would be stored in the database are not required for tracing purposes. For instance, the scans, if you pass along scans because you have been infected, the result of the scans will be stored in the database. So honestly, very difficult for us to understand why this would help and why this would be required for contract tracing. So we believe it's for research purpose, but then why putting this as a necessary data for contract tracing purposes. It's not clear. There is also the social security or national number, which would apparently be added into that central database. Again, why would this be needed? If it's just about calling person from whom you got the telephone via someone who thinks you might have in contact with that person, why do you need to check that this person is the owner of national number 123? Not clear for us, and then we don't understand and we do not accept the storage and the addition of that number into the database. And the last thing with regards to this is that the text provided that additional data will be added to the database, but without any further indication. And that is something we absolutely do not accept because it's a black box. There is no clarity and no possibility for the citizens to understand the processing of their personal data, which are contemplated. So this is something we very much insisted on. The storage retention duration was also exaggerated. And then we pointed out the fact that there are some competences which are regional and other which are of the federal state, which makes that the local authorities, so the region, should also take their own decrees to organize contact tracing. Now I try to move to the next slide, but it doesn't seem to work. So no. Is someone able to help? Ah, yes. Okay, it works. That was for the ordinary or manual contact tracing. Now moving on to the tracing via applications. I just have 2 slides on this, don't panic. The first important thing to mention is that we, of course, issued advice on the draft bills and royal decrees that we got. But before that, we already provided some recommendations through the EDPB. So you know the EDPB is the European Council for Data Protection. We are, of course, part of it, together with the other EU DPAs. And we realized already 2 months ago that it was required to harmonize our positions with regards to tracing via applications, just because we heard and we realized that every country, every EU country was considering putting in place its own application or tracing via application, and that it would be a disaster if we were all to define different guidelines and rules. So we agreed on a set of minimal rules that any developer of tracing application should follow. It has been published. I don't know if you have seen this document. In parallel, the EU Commission also issued what they call the guidance. It's also interesting to read. It goes into the same direction with perhaps a little less details. And if we go through these EDPB guidelines, it says, first of all, that, and that's very important, that the adoption of application should be fully voluntary. It means practically that states, or for instance, an employer, or I don't know, an airport, for instance, could not impose its travelers, workers, citizens to install an application. I think it has been the case in China or in some other Asian countries. In Europe, we don't want applications to be mandatory. That's very, very important. And of course, as a consequence, you cannot be sanctioned or disadvantaged if you refuse, for instance, to download and use the application. And it's kind of normal knowing that some people do not have a smartphone, for instance. It also has to be very clear, very transparent. People should not believe that they have to use and download these applications. I will also go to the essential. Data minimization is also very important, and it has been a very big part of our advice in Belgium. The EDPB said that the the system put in place should not allow to locate people and to identify individual users. So for instance, and that's what I mentioned earlier, the data generated through the application should not allow one of the users or a third party to see where the users were during at the moment they had the contact with infected people, for instance. It's not a location device. In the same vein, the system should not permit someone to define that a contact, the potentially problematic contact he had was with Mr. Y or Mrs. E. The other very important thing is that the only data which should be generated by the system are minimum data. Of course, that's the applicability of the principle, but it should be things like logs and keys and nothing else. And one of the problems we spotted with the Belgian system, which was proposed to us, is that it was generating data which were accompanied by telephone numbers. Of course, with a telephone number, you can very easily re-identify a user of the application. Again, I try to select the more important guidelines that we issued with the EDPB. Yes, as the system is all new, it was imposed two things. That first, a DPIA should be realized by any developer of a tracing application, so that we had the assurance that the local DPAs could provide a very in-depth advice as to any application put on the market. And we also impose regular audits. Everything is new. There might be problems that we were unable to identify as from scratch. We want to impose the states regular audits to monitor how the system works and whether there are false positives or other issues that we have not been able to anticipate. And also for the same reasons, we impose through the EDPB the publication of the source code before an application is put on the market and available for use. So that's, specialists, experts could, reverse engineer the application and decide whether there are some big issues which have to be solved before the application can be used by citizens. I will move to the last slide. But again, my system is, thank you, because the button has disappeared. The main issues that we identified with regards to the Belgian tracing system, which was proposed to us through the different bills and royal decrees that we revised, were the following. First, we wanted to insist on the fact that the protocol, so the backbone system on which the application should rely, was a good one. It's not me, I'm not an ICT expert, but those experts who looked at the protocol, it's called DP3T, is a very good protocol. Of course, it always implies some remaining risks, but that's the case of any protocol. But apparently it has been well developed. It's the risks are mostly solved, and the remaining risks are really of a very minimal nature. So we wanted to insist on that, and this protocol has been checked with the EDPB guidelines, and all the recommendations made by DPD are okay. So that's very important to mention. Now, the problem with the Belgian tracing application system which was proposed is that the protocol, the DP3T, manage the risk of re-identification. So there is basically no possibility to re-identify the users of the app. So to make the link between that person who might have been infected by this other person. And that's really important. But the Belgian system foresees that all data gathered by the applications are exported into a central database, the same database hosted by Cinsano, the one used for manual contract tracing, all data gathered in the framework of the tracing via applications will be exported in that database together with the telephone number of the users. So the very, very important and basic principle that the user should not be identified is completely destroyed by the system put in place by the Belgian designer of the system. And that's the biggest pain point that we identified through our different advices. For the rest, we insisted on different measures which should be ensured again to avoid this re-identification risk. We criticized the data storage duration. We insisted on the voluntary adoption and on the fact that companies, for instance, who would like to impose the use of the applications to their, let's say, employers or providers, should be sanctioned, because it will completely destroy the voluntary application principle. And the consequence of this would be that people would not trust the application anymore. People would try to, would denigrate that application, and all the system would fail because of that. So it's very important as well. And perhaps a last point, very important, it should be very easy and simple for everyone, every user of the application should be able at any point to say stop, so to deactivate the application and to decide and to impose that any data collected prior to this decision should be deleted. I think I'm at the end of the presentation. Perhaps just a final word from me. It's my opinion, but it's not necessarily the opinion of the Belgian DPA, but it's mine. I am in favor of tracing this because I really think it's necessary. It's really important in the situation where we stand now. At this stage, and certainly for the coming weeks and months, we have to have a very efficient, trustful, and solid tracing system in Belgium. The currently designed and already in use system of ordinary tracing is, according to me, not good, not efficient, and not privacy friendly. So it should be completely, I will use the words of someone else, rebooted. It's a viral logo recently used that term, which I find very interesting. A whole reboot of the system should really be contemplated. And as far as the tracing via application is concerned, I think this is the way we should follow, but perhaps not to the exclusion of another system, but tracing via applications should be preferred and certainly focused on why. First, it's much more trustful. When you call people asking them, well, with whom have you been in contact over the 3 last week? Honestly, I doubt that anyone can remember all the people he has been in contact with over the last 3 weeks. And how do you know the names and contact details of the person who was queuing before you at the bakery? You don't know. So it's not efficient for me. Second thing, it's extremely expensive. I've seen figures in the press. It's amazing. The amount of money that we spend for contract tracing via contact centers is just terrible in the situation in which your country is today. And the last point, and that's for me the most important, of course, it's that it's much more intrusive, as it creates a central database of health-related data, which will be preserved for 30 years. The access to such data are not clear for me. The use that will be made of such database are not clear neither. And tracing the applications, if it's well organized according to the EDPB guidelines, it's fully anonymized and raise, for that reason, no privacy concerns. So 3 good reasons for me to certainly focus on tracing their applications. And if we want to use ordinary tracing to completely review the current system, which for me is not good. I thank you and stay open for any question you might have. I'll check in the list if there are some. Yes, there are some. So the first one, between royal decree and formal, I answered that question during the presentation, so I will skip to the next one. Is Belgian tracing application going to rely on or be the same that developed by Apple and Google called Exposure Notification App. To my knowledge, no, it was not the idea. Now things can change, but it was not the preferred option of the people working on that. It is India, wherein the contract tracing app is mandatory for travel, government office, and so on. That's possible. I know that it's mandatory in some countries, but perhaps India, perhaps some other as well. I don't have a full picture of that. Where an employer manages smartphones in his property, provided to its employees, can the employer impose the application onto the devices via its mobile device? No, no, no. That's certainly something we do not want. That's very clear in the EDPB guidelines. It's irrelevant whether it's the employer who provides the telephone. Privacy is at core here, and it's not a good reason to impose the use of the application. So no. Where else? Why multiply actors and DBs? That's not clear for me. If Mr. Gobin could perhaps just give some more context to his question, that would be great. Risk of app updates after release must still conform to the original protocol and must explain. This is also something we pointed out in our advice, that any update to the brought to the application should of course still comply with the original, with the guidelines of the EDPB. Will Cienzano still be considered the controller for all tracing apps as was proposed? Have you looked at wearables as well in the context of 9 beside it? This is something we mentioned in our, I think, our first advice. We did not understand why Cienzano would be the data controller when we were talking about tracing applications. The thing is, it's still very unclear for us who is going to decide which application can be used in Belgium. I've heard everything and its contrary as from the beginning. At the initial stage, it was Cabinet de Baca who was supposed to choose one or more applications. He received, I think, 75 proposals. Then at this time, it was pointed out that it was not a federal competence, but a regional competence. So the idea became that each region should decide which application or applications could be used in each region. Then the press and other experts raised the fact that it was very problematic to have several applications in Belgium, with also the risk of lack of interoperability and the risk that people will be confused. Is that really, well, I'm proposed on the App Store to upload an application, but how can I be sure that it's one of the Belgium OK application? Is that an application developed by a crook, or how can I be sure that I can trust that application and that it's part of the Belgium tracing app system? So we came back to the situation where it was preferred to have only one application in Belgium, and now honestly I have no clue of where we stand. And to come back to the question of is it going to be Cienzano? In the first draft royal decree, we understood that Cienzano was the authority who was supposed to choose the application or applications to be used in Belgium, and apparently it's not the case anymore. It would be region by region, so it's a mess. Honestly, it's a mess. What data storage duration would you recommend for this app? Is there the need possibility to align these max periods across the EU? It depends. Tracing via apps, again, there is no personal data processed, in fact, because it's all about anonymized data. Again, GSM-A has been in contact with GSM-B for 20 minutes one day. So you don't know that GSM-A is the GSM of Marie and that GSM-B is the GSM of Philippe. So honestly, the data could be stored quite a long time. It won't allow anything. So where we mostly insisted on data retention duration is for manual tracing. And what we said is, well, when you have contacted someone to tell him or her that he or she has been in contact with someone who is infected and that she or he should watch out, perhaps have a test or stay home, you don't need the data anymore. So for us, the data, just after the contact has taken place, the data, the contact details of the potential contacts of infected people should be deleted. There is no valid reason for us to store this data for a longer duration. That's the point we made with ordinary tracing data retention duration, but perhaps I'm less concerned, I must say. Have you looked at alternatives? Honestly, that's not my job. I've been looking at what has been made in France and in other countries, but I'm not there to suggest the Belgian government to opt for another system. That's their job. Mine is to review the proposal and to provide them with advice on what's good in the proposal and what's not privacy compliant in their proposal. So alternatives, I know there are many alternatives. I think I heard also that there are quite a lot of Belgian developers who have developed apps which are completely compliant with the EDPB recommendations. Don't ask me why they have not been chosen or why they are not yet proposed on the App Store. That's more political choice and questions, but I think it's very possible to develop applications which are okay from a privacy perspective. Can a doctor appeal on its professional confidentiality in case of receiving questions related to contact tracing? Well, a doctor is not supposed to receive a phone call. What the doctor is asked to do is to upload in the Cienceno database data such as Marie has been infected, and I have a test dated yesterday which says that she's infected. And it's on the basis of that information that Marie will be contacted by the contact tracing center to ask her with whom she's been in contact. But the doctor, he will not be called, or perhaps is that another question? No, normally, the doctor will not be called upon. There is one big exception. If the contact tracer realize that an infected person belongs to what we call a high-risk community, then the contact tracing center will not call the person with whom the infected person has been in contact, but one single contact point, being either the doctor in charge of the community, for instance, let's say the doctor in charge of a university, of a house for the elderly. He will only contact that person by saying, well, we have here a test whereby we can tell you that this person of your community has been tested positive, so please take the necessary steps to protect and to inform the other members of the community. So it will not be individual calls to any member of that community, but there will be a centralization of the management system with one doctor, or if there is no doctor responsible for that community, administrative contact. And with the calling upon a single doctor, we find is a relatively good idea, but with an administrative person, this is also a remark that we made in our advices. It's not the secretary of the chief of the university who should organize contract tracing within the university. It's not a good solution for us. I see that other questions are coming. Oh, okay. Thank you for the precision. Well, the question is, I think the question is, can a doctor call upon his professional secrecy to refuse to upload the information into the system? Well, I had the same reaction when reading the first draft royal decree. I thought, well, this is a big exception to professional secrecy to which all doctors are held. And I read a reaction in the same sense from the Ordre des Médecins, who said basically, well, we are not completely against the idea of breaching or creating a big exemption to the secrecy of to the professional secrecy of doctors in Belgium, but it should be organized in a very well structured and clear bill, and not just, well, doctors will provide that information in a Cienzano database without further details. They said, well, it's a big concern. Professional secrecy is really sacré in French. We cannot just decide one day without thinking about it that all the doctors should reveal that information. So that was a big concern for me. It was written down in our first advice. And now in the last proposal that we see, is question about just mentioning that there will be an exception to professional secrecy of doctors in the framework of this specific crisis that we are facing now, and so forth. So my point now is to say, okay, that's not my job to say it's not allowed, but it should be very limited in time. I don't think we can just say, well, the data provided by the doctors will be stored in a central database for 30 years. That would be really problematic. So an exception, yes, well organized, well specified, which data, how, when, what for, and certainly no more than 3 or perhaps 6 or 12 months if we really need. If the crisis gets further and we are still in that situation within 7 or 8 months, why not? But not more. See that many people are leaving the room, which I understand perfectly, because I've been talking a lot. And I think we are at the end of the questions. So thank you. I don't know if George or Peter is taking back the micro.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. We have now George, who is going to do a short presentation. George, the floor is yours again. Thank you. Alexandra, maybe you can shut your voice and camera?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I understand George has problems to connect again. Let's wait maybe one few seconds to check whether that will work out or not. George? No way. Then we are at the end of this conference, and we are very, very happy to have you here all. We had 71 subscriptions today, and I saw that we had about 45 people attending live, which is quite a nice success for us. So on behalf of Insights.io, I want to thank our two speakers of today for this very, very great seminar. As I said during my short introduction, this presentation will be published from tomorrow on the platform, where it will stay available for you all. Next week, Monday, the 22nd, at the same time, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 p.m., we have another webinar planned. The speaker is Peter Gielen. He's a senior security management advisor about how to enhance your privacy management based on the newest ISO 27701 standards. A very interesting presentation, I'm very sure of that. And so thank you again for attending this Insights.io and DPO Circle executive briefing webinar. And we hope to see you all next week. Thank you.